Good morning, Dr. Thompson. How are you?
Good morning. Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. A little tired. I mean, it was a late night last night.
Yeah? Why is that?
Well, I got to go and see the Batman movie.
Really?
I thoroughly
How
enjoyed
was it? Good.
Really, really liked it very much. It was, I've been a Batman fan for years, and it lived all the expectations. Dark, gritty, moody Batman. My one disagreement with it is that there was too much rain.
Sorry?
It rained all the time.
Really?
Yeah, it was constant raining in Gotham. No city gets that much rain, except for Seattle.
Yeah, I mean...
So, couldn't imagine it. But it was a great movie. Really fantastic.
That's good.
Well directed.
Oh, very cool.
Mike Giacchino did the soundtrack. He's done so far, and this was no. So it was an all-around really nice experience. And Beth and I were able to get out and have a little dinner together and go see this movie and just enjoy things.
Oh, that's splendid.
Yeah, it was very nice. Looks like you're out of doors.
I am out of doors. I'm out of doors in the middle of my, well, roughly middle of my lovely town of Orvieto here. There's just some minor church in the background. I don't know, one of the 35 that are here.
I've heard of that place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great place. Actually, I wonder if if I rotate right, the sun is kind of interfering a bit, but if you see at all the Duomo in the background, yeah, just barely you can descry it out there, the top of the cathedral.
Sure.
Yeah, it's across the soccer field.
Little soccer field out there. Yeah.
That's right.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful to get out, and I'm glad to see that Italy unlocked and all able to get around. And
Yeah, and thankfully the unprecedentedly cold weather we've been having has let up at least a bit during the sunshine hours. The overnights are still getting down to freezing, uncharacteristically, but it's letting us experience a little bit of spring during the daytime.
Here's a thought. You said unprecedentedly cold weather.
Mm-hmm.
Too. I was reading that there was a massive volcanic explosion in the Pacific in January of this year. Did you see off of the coast of Tonga?
I didn't know. I was not aware of that, but that would, I mean, if history is any indication, that would obviously provide some explanatory power.
Yeah, it's apparently very press in the news, not suppressed in the news. It was huge explosion. I'll send you a video later on, but yeah, it's like the Mary, the Mary Shelley thing with the year without a summer at all. Where she and the others cloistered themselves there to warmth and ended up writing Frankenstein and Dracula and other fun stories like that.
What are the fun things you do when there's not a summer?
Exactly. You get a little morose, I suppose.
Realistic assessment of the world as it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Today. Not as the world as it is existentially at a deep level, but the period that it's in.
Yeah, it goes through these waves of cooling, I suppose you could say. At least we aren't snowball Earth, as the scientists try to happen at one time. So,
right.
But I'm glad you can get outside. I'm glad there's a little bit of a change. It is cold here, which is as a witch.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be down to like 3 degrees.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh yeah, but it's clear. I mean, we had a clear day today, and that's quite a lot.
Clear goes a long ways.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Because of your time period, you're outside and all this. Let's talk a little bit about the Hobbit, okay?
Yeah. Let's do that.
Now, chapter 4, you may not have all resources at your fingertips aside from this amazing mind of yours, but chapter 4, talking about the goblins and the title of the chapter being Overhill and Underhill. Okay?
Yes.
So maybe we could start there with the title itself, because it is about goblins and captured by orcs or the goblins.
Yeah.
Title Overhill and Underhill. What do you think?
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So this is because in my opinion, it's a genius title. It's brilliant. I think the key thing is, of course, the immediate connection with Bilbo's own surname, right? Or not Bilbo's surname. It has a later meaning, right? That he's Baggins, but Frodo adopts the name Underhill, which I think, obviously chronologically, this begins But by looking at the implication that it means for Frodo, we can better understand the deeper significance for within the Hobbit, the deeper significance for Bilbo, even though Tolkien himself didn't necessarily intend that at time of writing, right?
Right.
But the idea that his connection with his identity is one, looking at Frodo, is one who's Underhill. What does it mean to be Underhill? Right, it's a convenient name. He comes from Bag End. He lives under a hill. As Bilbo says, came from out of a bag. No bag went over me. Later on, but Underhill is this. This is like under a barrow. One who's buried under a mound. He comes from death.
Yeah.
And I think really that's the pivotal thing, the pivotal theme between this chapter and the next, which we actually end this chapter with and begin the next chapter, Riddles in the Dark, is that Bilbo undergoes an effective death. At least as far as literarily speaking, he goes under a literary death. We end the chapter and he's out. He falls off, hits his head, and it's Dunsky. He's down in the dark, and he awakens, and there's this golem creature, right? But I think this idea of Underhill, that they go over, the idea is they're going over the mountains, but they're doing so by going under, and you see an inversion of things, and that should tip us off to something, right? There's this paradox, there's this reversal, there's this carnival-esque element to it. I think that's just really cool.
Oriel and Underhill as a reversal, I like that very much, because of course that's a major theme in Christian works over and over again, starting from St. Peter being crucified upside down.
Upside down, yeah.
Dante uses that image all over the place.
Yes.
At the end of the Inferno, when he climbs out from a net region of Satan, and suddenly he's upside, suddenly he's right side up.
Right.
And even the popes in the burning tomb.
Yes.
So yes, it does seem to be a major theme of reversal here. So it's as though, well, I won't say it's as Tolkien consciously is making a parallel the death that occurs and the inversion of life that the being born again makes life seem as though it were topsy-turvy, flipped, inverted. Yeah. I liked at the very beginning too how he starts off with these massive forces. And something that's often overlooked, I think, is that there's a scene where they're going over the mountains and the giants throwing rocks around in the middle of this storm with lightning everywhere.
Yeah.
But this is a pretty important bit, because we start the whole going down into the underworld and death and rebirth. We start it with cosmic image.
Absolutely. This chaos and the primordial darkness.
Exactly. Yeah, primordial darkness. And they're all moaning about it. Oh, so we're getting wet. We're going to get crushed or kicked like a football.
Right.
So there's a slightly comic element to it, but at the same time, those titanic forces, which I find odd. We don't find those anywhere else in Tolkien's, what's the term, his mythology?
His legendarium.
Legendarium. We don't find anywhere else in the legendarium.
Yeah.
Giants exist here, and I can't think of anywhere else that they exist. Can you?
He does not mention it anywhere else, to my certain knowledge, with the exclusion of perhaps a brief allusion to it in somewhere in the Silmarillion, talking the Force of Morgoth, but I think that's a spurious connection. But they're caused these powers of the cosmos that are at work, like you said, like Titans. They are like the Titans, and we've got something that's in a time before time kind of battle of the gods that's going on.
Yeah.
That's what he's setting up for us.
What I'm teaching my students right now about the Titanomachy in Greek.
Yeah, exactly.
Or with the Titans that the Olympian gods have. It's kind of like that, only it's a comic, because a lot of the imagery in this novel, serious imagery presented in a comic way.
Yes.
So here he has this comic connection to the Titanomachy, but it is the creation of a new world for Bilbo. It's a cosmogonies.
Yes.
He's going to be a different character after this.
Right. They crawl into a cave, and he has a dream, and they're led into darkness. It's like a complete reversal of Plato's allegory.
It is, isn't it? It is. Yeah. He goes down into the shadow realm.
Yeah.
And that's where he finds, of course, well, not too much away, he finds the treasure, and he comes back out again eventually.
Right.
Yes, it is.
And I think something to talk more about with the next chapter we get there, but this idea of reversal and opposites, and this primordial chaos should set us up to understand the relationship between Bilbo and Gollum. As you know, that's his shadow self, that when he awakens from death, it's not just him, but it's him plus this shadow that then we later know, once we get into the Lord of the Rings, we know that he's been being shadowed, right? He's been being traced by this unself, the Gollum. And there's a lot that's awakened that way.
The reason that Smeagol goes underground eventually is because he's shunned by his community, and he's beaten, and he's
right.
Everybody. So it's a similar sort of reversal of the world business.
Mm-hmm.
It's Bilbo underground here. It's fascinating to me that they would choose a cave to hide in. I mean, I know that's practical, right? But at the time, this cave to go into, and it's got to be that there was some element of the Platonic thing going on there. There's a line out of Plato, I remember. Socrates says something like, "What would a man do amidst the storm of the world but to shelter behind a little low wall?"
Right.
And that's kind of what he's doing. He's sheltering here in this what appears to be protection, but ends up being the entrance into the underworld.
Yeah, it is. It's this unforeseen entrance to the underworld. I think that's exactly it. And Tolkien even tells us in the chapter, he sets us up. Now they go and they hid in a cave, which seems like it's the thing to make sense. But it's always important to thoroughly examine the cave first, because you never know what might happen. In case you were doubting, he's essentially saying you do this from necessity, but it's never a good idea.
Right. Yeah, this is the worst case scenario in a way. I like how he just often the devil's in the details. Here's the passage where he describes the path through the mountains. He said, "It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely, long." That's a great line there. This path, crooked way, lonely, and long. That they're traveling on the mountains, and it's getting pretty lonely, and it's crooked, it's twisting and winding, dragon-like through the mountains.
Yeah,
very difficult, and that's storm break worse. And then they have to cave in order just to get away from it all. So it's almost as though you were writing about all the different trials and troubles of the world, which again, to make it later on, all over.
Yeah.
So what I'm pointing out was that when Bilbo later on, he tries to escape from the storm of the world by putting it on and disappearing. So this is an image here that is disappearing underworld, where the ring is connected to. So
yeah, it's a treasure from the underworld. It's a thing that he finds there. They enter through the cave. Yeah. I was just on a mountain path this last weekend.
Is that right?
Just to test out. We had talked last time about Rivendell and this idea of these precipices, these valleys that are dark and narrow. Yeah. We drove through one of these, and it was long, it was dark and narrow, and this is the kind of place where you would see Rivendell. In fact, there's a stream running through the basin of the valley. But it's this stretch where maybe for a few hours in the day you get sunshine. Otherwise, it's always in shadow because the sun just doesn't shine. It's too acute. It's too straight, too rigid of the angle of the cliffs. As we emerged from the valley, we then, as we're heading up to this little hamlet where we have some friends who are living up there, in quite a remote, abandoned place, and we were going, and then as soon as we emerged from the valley, then we start to climb, and it was exactly this. It was a hard road, and crooked and long. It was zigzagging. We were snaking through the very cliff face, essentially, of the mountains. As we're driving in this, this Fiat Punto. 20-year-old Fiat Punto driving us up, as you're going on a dirt road that's crumbling away on one side down into the 1,000 meters below into the valley. Yes. And I imagine it's going to be something like this, that we encountered this transition where you go from the depths of the valley down to Rivendell. Here they are up at the heights of the mountains on this crooked path that's long and lonely.
Yes, and in the middle of a storm, which normally...
Thank God we didn't have.
Right, exactly. I mean, most of my experiences in Europe, Monte Cassino was kind of crazy going up the side.
It is. That's a nuts place to try and drive up to.
And in a bus, we're like, and over the edge.
Right. Everybody lean this way.
But see, I'd given my life to Jesus already when I was in Greece. You're going down the side of the mountain in Santorini. It's a sheer.
Gosh.
You just go down the side of the mountain on this road, but you're going down there at like 60 miles an hour doing this hairpin. Well, let me put it this way: the Greek who is driving you goes down at 60 miles an hour, dodging buses, hairpin turns. And I'm sitting there with, like, I think I had 5 other kids in the car with me. It was a little Yugo, like you said, a small car. So I had somebody who was sitting on my lap to conserve space, no seatbelts. And I look over the edge, there's this plummet, and I thought, if we go over the edge, there's nothing I can do, nothing at all. So, Jesus, take the wheel. But see, my point, that wasn't nearly as bad to me, those experiences, as the experience of driving across the plains area in America, there in the Dakota. Actually, it was in Wyoming, and we had tornadoes at night, and we couldn't get to our hotel.
Goodness.
And nothing. And then your hotel, was easily 30 minutes away still. So you're driving through the middle of this storm, this massive storm. It's hard to describe just how terrifying that situation is. Lightning everywhere, wind, rain, all this darkness. There's nothing you can do but just keep going, just keep pressing on. So it's, wow. I imagine that a storm in the mountains like he describes would be, as I said, cosmogonic, earth-changing, world-changing. You'd give your life to Jesus for sure.
Yeah.
So okay, let's move forward here. We get to the cave. We get this dream that he has. Now I'm going to read the dream. I want to read the dream because I want to focus just a minute, okay? It says here, it turned out a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them after all, for somehow he could not go to sleep for a long while. When he did sleep, he had very nasty dreams. He dreamed that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger and opened wider and wider, and he was very afraid but could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving way, and he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where, too. At that, he woke with a horrible start and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave and was already a wide distance. All right. What do we make of that dream? That's a powerful dream.
Yeah, it's a powerful dream.
Crack in the back of the cave.
Crack in the wall. I mean, and this is a creature who, Bilbo, right? He's no stranger to holes in the ground.
No, not at all. Not at all. And when it gives that line, it turned out a good thing that they had brought little Bilbo with them. He calls him Little Bilbo.
Little Bilbo.
Like little Bilbo, he likes caves. He's kind of cute. He's like a rabbit. That's not what it is that saves him. It's this terrifying dream.
He's not just the bravest little hobbit of us all.
No. No. The dream is one. So, and that image of Christ dying on the cross, and then the veil of the temple being rent in twain, seems to be a very parallel image here. Both talking about a similar thing about letting go.
Crack in the wall,
letting go of the world, of control of the world. My father used to talk about the hole in noon. The hole in noon, he called it. Part of what
I've heard this.
His prophetic visions when he was younger. I think the image is that we take the world for granted around us, but there's an experience, almost psychotic experience that some people go through, where the world suddenly shreds or tears or opens up, and he realizes something beyond this world that is terrifying, dark and terrifying. And it first presents itself as truly hostile. And the image of the mandorla in art is getting at that idea, because the mandorla we see as the Christ comes through that mandorla or sitting in that mandorla as blessing the earth, but it's depicted also as the mandorla as an entrance into darkness, an entrance into the portal of the underworld. I think the tearing open thing is that mandorla opening in the world. Imagine just practically. Imagine for a minute that you're standing there on a soccer field somewhere in Italy on a sunny day, and all of a sudden the sky literally tears open. Yeah. On the other side, what the heck would you think? I mean, you'd be petrified. Well, I don't know. You probably would be petrified, but most people that's right. Most people would be petrified. Yeah. This would be utterly beyond the ken of anybody. I mean, why is it the angels always say first thing out of their mouth when they appear to any human being? What they say?
Kill.
Which means people are like, what the what?
It's evidently a very frightening experience to behold an angel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's dreaming that. He's dreaming that his little world, because the cave, as you hinted at, the cave is a parallel to the Hobbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
The cave is a parallel. So what if his little Hobbit hole suddenly opened up?
Opened up. Do you go down? Yeah, it's like you're staring at the page and a hand comes out and just goes like this.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
jump in and then you got to fight these guys off with a pipe wrench?
Right.
Or what do you do? Do you stay in the diner?
That would be truly. You're sitting there having your cappuccino, and a hand comes and writes on the wall, "Many Tekel Fares."
Yeah.
That's,
The hell does that mean? Get somebody in here.
Hit me with another cappuccino.
Yeah.
It would be utterly bizarre to have something like this happen. But of course, in this case, it's a dream. So we could say, okay, well, it's a neat dream, but it's of his world opening to something completely new, which seems hostile at first, and then ends up being an entrance into the underworld. If we take it in the larger context, I think, like you were hinting at, the whole image, the whole chapter is metaphorically an entrance into the underworld of his own self, so shall we say subconscious, without violating Tolkien's law of allegory.
Yeah.
But it is an open.
At least as a typology, I mean, it's just it. I mean, it's in some ways. So I'm no Jungian, and I tend to stand against Jungianism. There's a lot wrong with it.
Right.
We're wrong with it because it tends to take things in the real world as symbolic of the internal psyche. I think, if we want to talk about the subconscious, I think it's the subconscious that is in many ways, in fact, the symbol for the reality of the underworld. And not to take it too strictly, but I mean, I think we can talk about it as the subconscious because he's entering into in the external subconscious, the subconscious of the cosmos. That is to say, he's entering into the real underworld in a tangible way.
Right.
No, so this is the word. When it comes to an etymological thing, cave in Italian actually comes from an ancient Syriac word for the same geological phenomenon called a grotto in Italian. A grotto, the grotto of Lourdes. As you see, bourgeois Catholicism, these Lourdes grottos everywhere. These quaint little plaster statues of the Madonna with some rocks around it. But the idea of a grotto is an ancient Near Eastern word concept that essentially means like bowels. It's the bowels of the earth. So when you go into a cave, you're really entering into the bowels of the earth, and there's and as Tolkien hints, despite appearances of the evident shallowness of a cave, it could really enter. There's no telling how deep that actually goes.
There's no indication how deep that actually goes. That's where you cut
right.
out.
Yeah, you're heading into the bowels of the earth. You don't know how deep it's going to go. How far down does that rabbit hole go, as it were?
I like that very much because, of course, that image of our world is as a shallow reflection. That's a very Platonic image, of course. So I like that because I'm, but the idea that there's something much deeper in the existence of our world, charged with the grand God, and to avoid being simply Mr. Underhill, you have to go down into that to experience it and to realize that there is this vast Tehom, this vast Hades underneath.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And of course, Tolkien, being the genius he is, he doesn't go full Jungian, because you never go full Jungian.
No, it's not a good idea.
You never go full idiot, as they say in the movie. But here you don't go full Jungian. So if it had been an actual going into his subconscious and the rest of the story was in his subconscious, we would have had a real problem. But what we don't get that. We get him actually being dragged down by goblins into the underworld, which is a great addition. Not only do you have the image of his mind opening, his consciousness opening to something dark underneath, but you have him physically experiencing something dark underneath, and things, and more things on. And how deep does that go? How far does that rabbit hole go? I mean, he explores that later on with the dwarves, Lord of the Rings, to say down deep into Moria in order to get some.
They delved too deep.
And they delve too deep, right? And so there are things down there, and there are things that really ought not to be disturbed. Yeah. Right. And so Bill was getting just a hint of it or a taste of it in this, and the opening of that Mandorla of his mind or his heart to something greater than what he had experienced before is a step that allows him later on to go down into the depths of Lonely Mountain to confront the dragon. Yeah. So it's a preparation for later on in the story, as well as part of his journey to become a greater person too.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic image.
That's exactly it. And I think it's interesting too that they don't just, it's not like a hole opens up and they oh, I wonder what's down here, and they go.
Yeah.
But they're grabbed by these demons, by these underworld demons, by these Oni that come, and they grab them and drag them down.
Yes, the Oni.
You're being pulled down by other forces. There's real personal forces coming up out of the underworld, boiling out.
Yeah.
And then grabbing you and the ponies and everything, except for the wizard, evidently, we find later, grabbing everybody and dragging them down to a hellish prison. And they chant this hellish song, which is a complete perversion and reversal of what the elves are singing when they're coming down into the valley. Tra-la-la-la-la-lally, come into the valley.
Yeah.
And these guys are singing, yo-ho, down to Goblin Town we go, my lad. Crack, snap, whip, slash.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I can't hear that, but I hear the Rankin Bass version. Because that was my first. No. It's funny. It was my introduction to it as a kid. And so that's what I feel all the time. And it's actually, there are points of that Rankin Bass performance that were decent. Most were pretty lucky. The songs were sometimes kind of fun.
They were catchy.
They were catchy too. So when I do hear that song, that clap, snap, crack, down to Goblin Town you go, my lads. Ho ho.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really kind of neat how it sticks. I think that music does that to a person anyway. It sticks with you forever, that you can't get rid of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But here's a neat thing, by the way, in our research. I was looking to see why, I was really intrigued why he uses the term goblins and then later uses the term orcs. In 1960, he wanted to retrograde it and rewrite this whole section too, using the word orcs.
Yeah.
Orcs is, of course, his creation of the goblin language, the Black Speech Mordor, okay? Uruk. But it develops later, and so he would have had to go back to redo it in this chapter where he calls them goblins. But it raised a question for me of why did he choose goblins at all? What's he getting at with goblins? So I did a little background research. What I found was kind of intriguing. I won't go over all of it, but one point is that in the work by George MacDonald, which was very popular at the time and influential.
Oh, yes.
Okay. He writes in The Princess and the Goblin in chapter 6 that there's a character, Curdie, who is, I think he's a farmhand or something like that. He's a young boy who helps the princess. And Curdie sings songs throughout and poems throughout that help them on their way, sort of a little magic that he creates. In the Princess and the Goblin, Curdie sings these songs that weave a magic. And one of the songs that he sings, I found, was eerily similar to what the goblins sing. So here's the song.
Really?
1, 2, hit and hew. 3, 4, blast and bore. 5, 6, there's a fix. 7, 8, hold it straight. 9, 10, hit again. Hurry, scurry, bob a smother. There's a toad in the road. Smash it, squash it, fry it, dry it. You're another. Up and off. There's enough. Ha 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 ha.
Oh, that's
something.
I mean, it just lifted that the rhythm.
Rankin Bass version, right? 1, 2, hit and hew. 3, 4, blast and bore. 5, 6, there's a fix. 7, 8, hold it straight. You go, my lads. Ho ho, my lads. I mean, it's like
it's right there.
Plopped it down.
Goblins only know one song. We'll just take the same one. We'll put it in here.
I think it's kind of cool, but of course that opened up a whole window of study for me looking at this up. Apparently, goblins were a very popular theme in 19th century literature. They're all over the place, not just in but a number of different writers and artists were constructing stories about goblins. I mean, Charles Dickens had one. He had a short story, Goblins Taking. You had the Peer Gynt Suite, for instance, and you had Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. So Little Orphan Danny, James Whitcomb Riley, who was an American writer, Indiana guy, I think. And that was the one that had the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Okay,
Hmm.
so they were all using this image of goblins as these dark underworld forces, especially in children's literature. So when Tolkien
Yeah.
with his own children's literature at the beginning, I'm thinking he's probably saying, okay, let's put goblins in there.
Yeah.
We'll call them goblins because that's what they're. But he's drawing from a huge bulk of literature in 19th century that we won't be necessarily familiar with unless we
Right.
do a little bit. But then that raises the question: why did he change it later, creating the Uruks and the orcs? Why did he want to even go back and retrograde it? Why not stick with the goblins? What's the difference between even the words goblin and the word orc?
Yeah. So I mean, what's interesting with that's the connection with the 19th century literature seems very, very clear. And the idea of a goblin, and this is my, I'm just going to share sort of my expression, so my reception of the sort of collective memory, the image of what a goblin is, sort of culturally, at least again, and this is within the Anglophone world. It
Yeah.
does, like so many of these creatures of Northern myth, they don't necessarily translate into Greco-Roman mythological origins. Like in Italy, this is always the thing with the translation of Tolkien stuff. Is translations into Italian have to be radically different because they just don't have what is an elf? Like Italian it just doesn't exist in the cultural context,
Is that right?
consciousness.
Wow. Okay.
And I want to say more about that regarding the orcs. But the goblin idea is that goblin, to me, my understanding is that a goblin essentially is a diminutive creature. Like it's a small critter that'll come and grab you, it'll nab you, and maybe it hides under the stairs or something, right? It comes from the underground, from the underworld, and it grabs and snatches and pulls you down, which is obviously what the goblins here do.
Right.
But I think later when he's reworking this into Lord of the Rings, which he, admittedly becomes very dark, much darker than he set it out to be, right? I think you've got to have bigger monsters because you're dealing with a bigger darkness. And bigger is because orc, why does he say the word orc? And he retro projects the etymological origins of the English word orc to say orc is a translation of ir from elf, which is their borrowing of the black speech of Mordor to say uruk. But that is actually the origins of the word, more or less, at least the way that it develops, because orc exists independent of Tolkien. Orco is the Italian word for ogre in French. So the English word ogre comes from the French word orc or ogre, which here they call orco. So you've got tons of fairy tales in Italy about the earliest version in Italy of the Goldilocks, not Goldilocks, what's her name? Let Down Your Hair, Rapunzel.
Rapunzel, right.
In German, the English-German world, Rapunzel here they call her something else. They call her parsley, but it sounds better in Italian. Prezzemolina. But the reason she's locked in the tower in the first place is that her mom, while she was in utero, her mom had a craving for this parsley that was growing in the ogre's garden. So she sends dad out to go pilfer the garden of the orco to take his parsley, and then that's what locks the devil's bargain. Then I get your child, etc. Right? And then the daughter lives in the tower. She grows long hair, and she's rescued, etc. We know the rest of the tale. But the origin is that he stole from an ogre, which in Italian would be orco, so an orc, and so it's a bigger, more grotesque thing.
Wow, that's cool.
So I think that's what he's doing with that change.
I think so, and I wasn't going to go that much depth with the lingual thing because I didn't know that. That's awesome to find out. But I was going to point out that when you read Lord of the Rings after reading Hobbit, you find absolutely the orcs there are far more threatening, dangerous, I would say robust or muscular force. Here, kind of goofy and a little strange and kind of menacing, especially the head goblin who's really ahead. I mean, that's kind of a funny joke.
Yeah, right.
That basically they're threatening, but they're not. You can't imagine these guys mounting a full-scale war against elves. They're just not that powerful. I mean, they do later on in the 5 armies, but it's like they'd have to have 5 goblins per elf or something.
Right, and even there they come flowing over the mountain from the backside of the mountain, like like a hive of spiders or something. You know, they're still undergroundish, underworldish that are just crawling up from
Yes, yes.
around this. Their
These
force is in numbers, like you said. It's not in this robust, muscular figure, which I think is why, or at least it's justifiable that Tolkien leaves it and doesn't go back and redact this into orcs retrospectively, but keeps it as goblins because they're fundamentally grabbing creatures. They gobble you down into the ground here.
sure, sure. Yeah, they very much are like the goblins of Norse mythology. I remember one story, where the hero gets seduced by the goblins. They take on feminine form because they're shapeshifters. They seduce him to spend time in the underworld until he abandons his post at the protecting the Raven Banner. But it's that sort of thing. They're tricky and they're fly, but they're not overpoweringly physical, and they aren't disgusting creatures in the same sense the orcs are, or the Uruks are.
Right.
So in this, I did a little bit of linguistic research on that word goblin, and what I found is that it actually it's related to the word kobold. If you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, kobolds were a creature you'd fight there. The word was originally from a Greek source, koballos, which means a rogue or a knave, but also is related to, by Indo-European, is related to the German word Kobe, which is a refuge, cavity, or cave.
Which is where we get the word cave.
Exactly, Kobe.
Interesting.
But Kobe, kobold, or goblin, they're all related words to each other. So that makes sense that these guys would be hanging out in the cave, right?
Right.
I like also the fact, that these creatures were the predominant monster in the 19th century. You know, these were the ones that invaded children's literature. They would be the ones if you don't watch out. So it's almost like a child encountering evil for the first time. Image of the goblin.
Right. Yeah, it's like if you grew up on these kind of fairy tales and you're reading The Hobbit for the first time, and there you are, it's like, oh my God, they're real and they're out, and they do.
Yeah, they're really, exactly. They're
like,
really,
the goblins are there and they grab you.
Yeah, something is down there. You know, as Nietzsche says, if you stare into the darkness too long, you find the darkness is staring back at you. Which is right, you know. I mean, if you go through life in the shallow nature of the cave, you never notice that there are things outside the campfire. But if you are aware, you become that there are a lot of eyes there in the darkness, and they come and get you, and they take you. The goblins will get you. Don't watch out.
Right.
Holmes said.
And it's
go ahead.
Is it? I don't recall if it's in this chapter or in when they escape, but I think it's here when Tolkien steps back and, as narrator, tells us that the goblins are the ones that he's pretty sure are responsible for, like, anti-personal landmines and horrible torture devices. All the horrors of modern war were invented by goblins.
Yes. Might be
is it the next chapter? Could be. Because I thought it's when they're singing, he pauses for a moment
and he talks
about, here's the thing about goblins.
Yeah. Let me see if
they don't do a lot of work. They like slaves. He says, unfortunately, they collect slaves. They make humans do their dirty work. And they invent all sorts of torture devices and weaponry and all the horrors of war and put men to work for them to create these things.
Yeah. I mean, he has a number of passages, like right after the singing, for instance, it says, let's see here. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys and other much more dreadful things. Always hungry. They're always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. So they eat lots of things and they're always hungry, it says.
Yeah.
Then it says further on, goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. Clever, that tricks you.
Clever, not beautiful, yeah.
No. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled dwarves when they take the trouble, though they are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture they make very well, or get other people to make to their design. Which is interesting that they would design things. Make this iron, this sledgehammer.
Yeah.
They have They have the cleverness enough to design things that are efficient and work well, but they're not beautiful.
Right.
Prisoners, slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not, here's the line, it is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, in those wild parts, they're not advanced, as it is called, so far. That passage is so wonderful. So wonderful.
Yeah.
So I was thinking this the other day, not the other day, it was when we went down to Arizona last, and we went to the Nuclear Museum, the Museum of Nuclear History. And it's a fascinating place to go, really, because you see the whole development from the first discovery of uranium all the way up until the 1970s, when the Cold War. But one of the things I was noticing was you go through this and you see the empty bombs now without the fissile material. You see the ships or parts of the ships or photographs. You see all these tools and they're butt ugly. They're just steel and bolts and that dull gray paint that they would put on everything.
Yeah.
And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about that World War I experience of having very efficient things, grenades, machine guns. But these were not beautiful objects. And if you compare, you go to a history museum and you look at samurai armor, or you look at the foil of the 16th century, or you look at the anything pretty much. It had ornate pictures and images and little detail work on it that is completely missing from the modern world. Completely missing from the modern world. That's got to be what he's mentioning is his own experience of the tools of war.
Absolutely.
Why did that change? What was the thing that caused the change from having, it used to be the man, for instance, even up into the late 19th century, a cavalryman, for instance, and the Cossacks, the Hussars, they would be proud of their uniform and their plume and their epaulettes and their sword with the ornate device.
Yeah.
None of that after World War I, right?
No.
So what was the change, I wonder? What was the thing that he's referring to that the orcs did? And probably doing.
Very likely it was due to them, right? It's due to goblin work. But machinery, industrialism, he said efficiently kill large amounts of people. Efficiently. So you've got to focus on efficiency, you focus on the machine, because they're machines, right? They're not just the individual weapon, the sword, which is just as much a soul of the wielder as the soul snatcher of the victim. You've got, it has this sacral kind of function where a Stinger missile doesn't have a sacral function in the same way. It's a way of distancing the self from the self, so that I can cleanly, from my perspective, and efficiently kill somebody or lots of somebody's very far away without any risk to myself, working with my hands as little as possible, just like a goblin. And so there's a goblin spirit to this whole movement of industrialism, especially the industrialization of human slaughter.
Yeah.
And he leaves it to me. He leaves it open. He says, very likely, right? He's pointing us to a black hole in our own world. And said there is a rip here that's been left, and we need to at least point it out and look at it and say, this is what's down that black hole. This is what the black hole of the industrial warfare that goes this direction.
And at the center of that black hole is the ring.
Yeah.
Startling.
That's exactly right.
The center of the black hole is the ring. I mean, I would think that the whole shift, because it really does occur right there at the turn of the century in the 20th century, the shift is a shift of perspective. It's a perspective of how do I remain honorable and do my honorable duty, putting myself at risk in service of my captain, my lord, it shifts to how can I stay alive and kill as many other people as possible.
Bingo.
And that shift is a startling shift. It must have been right around the turn of the century, maybe even before World War I. Because World War I, like the symptom.
Right. That's exactly it.
I am really startled by that insight. When I think about, for instance, the fact that soldiers with typical soldier humor would write profanity on the bombs that they were going to drop. Hey, Adolf, or Kiss Me Fritz, that kind of thing, before they dropped the bomb there on wherever that they were going to drop it. It's startling that there is very little of the beauty and the ornateness and the honor that was in weapons in the 19th century. Now, I know, for instance, that Robert E. Lee was famous for saying in the middle of the American Civil War, "It is well that war is so horrible, otherwise we might grow to love it." Now, I know that. So already people were thinking about the horror of that business. And
Right.
one could say that the whole ornateness and the beauty of those objects, you could say that that's all a lie. It's a falsification. There is no honor in war. There's no beauty in war.
Right.
There's truth to that. Ambrose Bierce saw it in the 19th century.
Yes.
But I would pose that Tolkien, and part of the reason why I love the beauty of his works, Tolkien suggested something rather different here. It's that when you create those weapons covered in the beautiful artwork of the elves or the men of Numenor, it's as a further protection against that horror. It's as a way of saying you're part of something greater and trying to be honorable and not just there to kill and torture as many people as possible.
Right, that's exactly it. And that's precisely the juxtaposition that we see when Gandalf appears with the two swords, with was it Glamdring and Orcrist?
Yes.
And that he's got these magical weapons, these holy weapons that have
Yes.
the runes on them, the elvish runes carved into them from Gondolin, this sacred city in the mountains that was over the mountains, different mountains, but the image is the same. And it's contrasted with the mechanized destruction and slaughter of the goblins. And it's with that he separates the body from the head of the goblin.
Yeah, the head, right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, because Tolkien obviously doesn't hold to this idea that all warfare is always just hell, right? There's, it's to be avoided, it's not to be reveled in. But yet we see, obviously, in later depictions of the Lord of the Rings, the description of glory and honor and battle and valor and beauty,
Yes.
nearly always connected to a particular weapon or a particular horn that's blown, or a particular bit of, something there, like you said, that's putting a distance between you and the horror that's there. There's the battle between light and darkness instead of the efficient killing of, bodies that are otherwise on a level playing field.
Yes, because if it were just the efficiency of killing, why not just drop the bomb, the big one, on everybody? Because that would be the solution. That is the, if I may use the term, the final solution, right?
Right.
I mean, it's horrible to think about that. But if our perspective is that we are there to slaughter as many human beings as possible in as short a time as possible, and keep our hands clean as possible, if that's the goal, then yeah, the bomb being dropped that's an easy decision. If the goal there is instead to be human and to try and create human things and human culture, then you have to go to war at times. But it's always in order to be honorable and to protect the things that you fight for, the things that you love.
You fight to defend beauty.
Yeah.
And therefore you bring beautiful things with you to do that fight.
Yeah.
The vehicle of the beautiful things that are fighting the ugly and the inhuman. In contrast, what he's pointing out is the goblin work in modern warfare is there's nothing beautiful. This is the old and ancient lie, right? That here we are in the trenches with machinery, and we're just the tools of the machines designed to destroy, kill everything. I'm not here to fight for something beautiful. I'm here as one more bit of cannon fodder, right? You read the trench warfare,
Cut out again, sorry. One of the problems of long distance discussions. Somebody cuts out from somewhere. Well, to conclude this thought, because even if I can't get him back on, I can't get him back on. But to conclude the thought, he brought Cameron Thompson in Italy, we've lost him, but for now, he brought up the point of bureaucracy and being part of the gears of war. And that's a great insight, because that's what these goblins are. They are part of the gears of war, the wheel of power, if you will, which is the eternal cycle of the underworld. It's the wheel of power. And constantly being part of a bureaucracy of some sort, which, as I'm reading now with both with Romano Guardini and also with Václav Havel, this idea of the bureaucracy being greater even than human beings themselves. It's not run by any one person. It's run by the bureaucracy itself, the machine, the computer, which decides whether we all live and die. And our own individual lives are meaningless. They're pointless. They don't have any purpose aside from being the cog in the machine. If we believe that, if we're duped by that, to believe that, then we are going to be part of that goblin horde. We're going to be part of that bureaucracy, miserable bureaucracy, and not be able to stand up for things that are beautiful and noble and true, because we will simply be crushed under the weight of the goblins. The goblins will get you if you don't watch out again. But here's this line that we come to where the great goblin is first introduced. And he says, who are these miserable persons? Who are these miserable persons? And that word, miserable persons, first off, he doesn't say, who are these people? Or who are these dwarves? He says, who are these miserable persons? The very address of the great goblin at first is uncivil. It is uncivilized. It is like a bureaucrat who's disturbing me in the midst of my procrastination. He doesn't say, welcome to the Goblin Kingdom, welcome to Goblin Kingdom, or anything like that. He says, who are these miserable persons? A very bureaucratic way of addressing them. But then he calls them persons, not humans, not people, not individuals. Persons. It's a very clinical, bureaucratic way of addressing them. And then miserable persons. They are miserable in the sense that they have been brought down to Goblin Town, and they've been out in the wet and the rain, and they are basically part of the machine now. They've been dragged down into the machine. So who are these miserable persons? And immediately his own bureaucrats answer him. Dwarves. And this, said one of them. And we found them on our front porch. We asked them to come in, and they fought us. And that's when the dwarf, Thorin, tries to persuade him, well, we're not doing anything bad. We're just trying to find our way through the mountains. But the Goblin King will have none of it, because, of course, he is the head of the bureaucracy. And so these guys get swept up in the bureaucracy, and they're going to be killed. It's pretty obvious they're going to be killed, because when they bring out the sword of Thorin, they say he's a liar, right? He has this sword, and they hold up the sword, and the great goblin goes bananas. And it's Orcrist, the goblin cleaver that he has. And the great goblin decides he's going to bite off his head. He's going to devour Thorin's head with his big head. And he tries to, but then that's when Gandalf shows up with Glamdring, the other beautiful sword, the other sword of the elfin and goblin wars. And there's a big fight that ensues, and then the dwarves get away. And it's a very small thing, the getting away. They run away from them, and they're chased through the tunnels at the very end, and eventually the runners come up behind and secretly grab them, goblin them, kobold them by the heels, and then Bilbo tumbles off and he bumps his head. But really, it's an escape from the bureaucracy of the goblins. The goblins tried to get him, and almost Kafka-esque, that they escape almost a Kafka-esque world, and they get out, and finally we end the chapter. So I want to finish here because I don't see Cameron is not able to join us again, it seems like. So hopefully I can get him back at some future date. But sorry that we lost him at the end. But I want to conclude with just, this is the opening of the Earth, is the opening into the underworld, and the opening into this new life for Bilbo. But it's an opening into the possibility that he's going to experience things greater than he ever thought he would. And part of that first experience is the experience of getting caught in the gears of the world, the gears of darkness, the bureaucracy of the underworld. And he narrowly escapes it, not by music or song, but by standing up to them and fighting, and then running away, because running is sometimes the better part of valor. So he runs away, and then he tumbles down into the next chapter, which is down into the underground world, or the underground lake, where we meet the Golem. And we'll meet the Golem next time. Thank you, Dr. Cameron Thompson, for being on with us for the time that you could be on. and hopefully we can get you back on at some future date. And for those of you who watched with me, appreciate your attending this morning. And again, a pleasure always. And we'll delve next time into that world of Gollum and the riddles in the dark. Thank you so much. And God bless you all and keep you. And what's our ending? I'll try our ending by ourselves. Farewell, wherever you fare, till your areas receive you at the journey's end. And may the wind under your wings bear you when the sun sails and the moon walks.